The galaxy had 13 rules for primitive species. Rule number 1. They stay on their home world until they prove themselves worthy. Rule number 7. No interference with galactic politics until they reach Class 5 civilization status. Rule number 13. Under no circumstances should they ever be allowed to develop their natural warrior instincts unchecked. Humanity broke all 13 rules in a single day. The Galactic Council thought they had contained the humans safely behind an impenetrable quantum barrier around their solar system. For 300 years, Earth remained isolated while the galaxy prospered in peace. Wars became diplomatic discussions. Conflicts turned into trade negotiations. The age of violence was finally over. But the Council made one critical mistake. They forgot that humans don't just fight other species. They fight each other. And in 3 centuries of isolation, with nowhere to direct their aggression but inward, humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had perfected war itself. Now that the barrier is failing, the humans are coming. And somewhere in the depths of space, something that was once human but has become so much more is already watching, waiting, planning. The god of war has returned, and this time, he's brought friends. Admiral Zektar of the Vraxian fleet had seen many strange things in his 200 years of service. He had witnessed the birth of stars, the death of civilizations, and the peaceful negotiation of conflicts that would have once torn the galaxy apart. But nothing had prepared him for what his sensors were showing him now. The soul barrier was failing. "Run the diagnostic again," he commanded, his 4 arms working frantically across the control panels of his flagship, the Eternal Harmony. The barrier around the human solar system had been stable for 3 centuries. It was supposed to last for 3,000 more. "Admiral, the readings are consistent," reported his tactical officer, a young Krillian whose skin was flushed purple with anxiety. "The quantum field generators are operating at only 60% efficiency. At this rate, complete barrier collapse is inevitable within 7 standard cycles." Zektar felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. 7 days. 7 days until humanity was free to roam the galaxy once more. The thought sent waves of terror through his consciousness that he struggled to suppress. Every child in the galaxy knew the stories of the last human war, passed down through generations like cautionary tales. Before the barrier, humans had been contained on 17 different worlds across 3 star systems. They had advanced quickly, too quickly for the Galactic Council's comfort. While other species took millennia to develop space travel, humans had done it in mere centuries. While others needed thousands of years to master fusion, humans had created weapons of mass destruction within decades of splitting their first atom. But it wasn't their technological advancement that had terrified the galaxy. It was their nature. Humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. They fought to dominate. They fought because fighting was what they did. Even when offered peaceful solutions, even when given everything they needed, humans found reasons to wage war. They had turned their own homeworld into a testing ground for increasingly devastating weapons, and when they finally reached the stars, they had brought that same destructive creativity with them. The last human war had lasted only 3 years, but in that time, humanity had shattered the carefully maintained peace that had existed for millennia. They had introduced concepts that civilized species had forgotten: total warfare, scorched earth tactics, the complete annihilation of enemy populations. They fought not just with weapons, but with a psychological brutality that left even their victories hollow for their enemies. The war had ended only when the humans suddenly, inexplicably, stopped fighting. Every human military unit across 17 worlds had simultaneously laid down their arms and surrendered. No demandes, no negociations, no explanations. They had simply stopped, as if responding to some signal only they could hear. That surrender had been the most terrifying part of all. The Galactic Council had acted swiftly. The Soul Containment Protocol had been enacted within days. Every human except those on Earth had been relocated to their homeworld, and an impenetrable quantum barrier had been erected around their entire solar system. The humans would be contained there until they evolved beyond their violent nature, or until they destroyed themselves. Either outcome was acceptable to the galaxy at large. For 300 years, the barrier had held. For 300 years, the galaxy had known peace. Wars had become extinct. Conflicts were resolved through careful mediation and resource sharing. The golden age of galactic civilization had dawned. But now, as Admiral Zektar stared at his display screens, that age was coming to an end. "Sir," the communications officer called out, her voice trembling. "We're receiving a transmission from inside the barrier." The bridge fell silent. No signals had ever penetrated the barrier in either direction. It was theoretically impossible. "Source?" Zektar asked, though he already knew the answer. "Earth, sir." "Human frequencies." Zektar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of peace settling on his shoulders. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, displaying a figure that made every alien on the bridge step backward in instinctive fear. It was human, unmistakably so, but changed in ways that spoke of centuries of technological and biological advancement. The being's skin had a metallic sheen, and his eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to pierce through the screen itself. But it was the smile that truly terrified them. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Greetings, Admiral Zektar of the Vraxian fleet," the human said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of amusement that made Zektar's blood run cold. "My name is Marcus Chun, though my people know me by another title now. I am the god of war, and I bring greetings from the human stellar empire." The human paused, seeming to enjoy the shocked silence on the bridge. "I imagine you're wondering how I know who you are, or how this transmission is reaching you through your precious barrier. The answer is simple. We've been watching you. We've been watching all of you. For 300 years. Zektar found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Impossible. The barrier prevents all communication." The human smile widened. "Your barrier prevents primitive electromagnetic communications. But we stopped using those methods shortly after you imprisoned us. Tell me, Admiral, what do you know about quantum entanglement warfare? Temporal displacement tactics? Reality-anchored weapons systems?" Each term sent a chill deeper into Zektar's core. These weren't just advanced technologies. They were concepts that the galaxy's greatest scientists had deemed theoretically impossible or too dangerous to pursue. "You see," Marcus continued, "you made a fundamental error when you locked us away. You assumed that isolation would make us weak, that cutting us off from galactic civilization would cause us to stagnate or destroy ourselves. But humans don't work that way. When you put a human in a cage, they don't just learn to live in it. They learn to break it." The human stood up from what appeared to be a command chair, and the camera pulled back to reveal a vast bridge filled with other humans. But these weren't the primitive beings the galaxy remembered. Each one was enhanced, improved, evolved beyond recognition while remaining unmistakably human. Their technology was sleek and organic, grown rather than built, and every surface hummed with barely contained energy. 300 years ago, my species was scattered across 17 worlds, fighting each other almost as much as we fought you. But isolation changed us. It forced us to unite or perish. It gave us a common enemy, the cage you built around us. And it gave us time to perfect what we do best. Marcus gestured to something off camera, and the screen split to show multiple views of the human solar system. But it wasn't the solar system the galaxy remembered. Every planet teemed with life and industry. Vast ring structures surrounded the sun itself, harvesting its energy on a scale that boggled the mind. And everywhere ships, millions of them, sleek, predatory vessels that moved through space like sharks through water. "We've spent 3 centuries preparing for this day," Marcus said. 3 centuries perfecting every aspect of warfare, from the tactical to the strategic to the philosophical. We've fought ourselves in 1,000 different ways, testing every possible scenario, every conceivable tactic. We've turned war from an art into a science. And then we've transcended science itself. The human stepped closer to the camera, his enhanced features becoming even more alien and terrifying. "But here's the part that should really concern you, Admiral. We didn't just prepare to fight you. We prepared to win." As if responding to his words, alerts began blaring across the bridge of the eternal harmony. The barrier readings were fluctuating wildly, not failing randomly, but being systematically dismantled from the inside. "Impossible, sector briated." The barrier can only be controlled from the outside. 300 years is a long time to study a prison, Admiral. long enough to understand every quantum signature, every harmonic frequency, every possible weakness. Your barrier wasn't built to keep us in. It was built to keep others out. And now we're politely asking you to remove it. The human smile took on an edge of genuine menace. Of course, if you prefer, we can remove it ourselves. But I think you'll find our methods somewhat more dramatic than yours. On the tactical display, Zektar watched in horror as the barrier began developing stress fractures. Not random failures, but precise cuts that followed patterns too complex for his instruments to fully analyze. The humans weren't breaking the barrier. They were dissecting it. "What do you want?" Zektar asked, his voice barely steady. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "Want? We want what we've always wanted, Admiral. Freedom. The right to explore the galaxy. The chance to meet new species and learn about new worlds." His smile became absolutely predatory. "And if some of those species happen to object to our presence, well, that's what we spent 300 years preparing for." The human leaned forward, his glowing eyes seeming to look directly into Zektar's soul. "You have 7 days to prepare your defenses, Admiral. 7 days to evacuate any worlds you consider particularly precious. 7 days to decide whether you want to face us in open war or seek some sort of accommodation." Marcus stood back up, his image beginning to flicker as the transmission started to fade. "Oh, and Admiral, don't bother trying to reinforce the barrier. We've already identified 17 different ways to collapse it instantly if we detect any such attempt. This conversation is our gift to you. A warning, if you will. Use it wisely." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge of the eternal harmony in stunned silence. For long moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Zektar turned to his communications officer. "Send a priority alert to the Galactic Council. Emergency session. Tell them." He paused, struggling to find words adequate to the situation. "Tell them the humans are coming." As his crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Zektar stared at the tactical display showing the slowly disintegrating barrier around Earth's solar system. Each fracture that appeared seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the humans inside were testing their prison's weaknesses with surgical precision. He thought about the humans' words, about 3 centuries of preparation and perfection. The galaxy had spent those same centuries growing soft, turning away from violence and conflict in favor of peaceful coexistence. They had built a civilization based on the assumption that war was a relic of the past, a primitive behavior that evolved species naturally outgrew. But humans had never outgrown anything. They had simply become better at it. In 7 days, the barrier would fall. In 7 days, humanity would be free to roam the galaxy once more. And this time, they wouldn't be the scattered, primitive species that the galaxy had barely contained before. They would be something new, something evolved, something that had spent 3 centuries doing nothing but preparing for war. Zektar closed his eyes and tried to imagine what horrors awaited them. But he knew that whatever he could imagine, the reality would be far worse. Because humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to make their enemies regret ever opposing them. And the god of war was coming home. The Galactic Council chamber had not seen such chaos in over 2,000 years. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the massive amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, anger, and desperate planning. At the center of it all stood High Counselor Veltar of the Altarian Collective, her crystalline form pulsing with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated extreme stress. "Order," she commanded, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics until it echoed like thunder. "We must have order." Gradually, the various delegates settled into their seats, though the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut. Veltar looked out over the assembled representatives, noting how many species were represented. The Vraxians proud and militaristic even in peace. The ethereal Luminari, beings of pure energy who rarely involve themselves in physical affairs. The insectoid Kythera, whose hive minds made them excellent strategists. The aquatic Nereidans, the silicon-based crystallites, the metamorphic shapers. Dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, trillions of beings, all united in their terror of humanity's return. "We have all received Admiral Zektar's report," Veltar began, her voice carefully controlled despite the fear patterns still flickering across her surface. The soul barrier is failing. Human containment will be breached in 6 standard cycles. A wave of nervous chittering, humming, and other species-specific sounds of distress rippled through the chamber. The Kithara delegate, a massive creature whose carapace reflected the chamber's lights in prismatic patterns, raised one of her forearms. "High Counselor," the Kithara said, her voice a harmonic blend of individual thoughts from her hive mind. "Our calculations suggest immediate military mobilization. If we strike now, while they remain contained, we can prevent this catastrophe before it begins." Murmurs of agreement rose from several sections of the chamber, but Veltar raised her own appendages for silence. "Delegate, your suggestion has merit, but you forget why we contain them rather than destroying them in the first place. Our ancestors tried to wage war against humanity. The results were catastrophic." She gestured to the chamber's central holographic display, which immediately began showing archived footage from the last human war. The images were difficult to watch, even after 3 centuries. Burning worlds, ships torn apart not by weapons, but by kinetic impacts from human vessels moving at relativistic speeds. The aftermath of battles where humans had used biological weapons that turned entire populations against themselves. But it wasn't the destruction that made the footage so disturbing. It was the precision, the calculated cruelty, the way humans had turned warfare into a form of psychological torture that left their enemies broken long before their fleets were defeated. The Vraxian Empire lost 47 worlds in 3 years, Veltar continued. The Kithara Collective saw 12 Hive Queens assassinated using weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate your biological defenses. The Luminari Confederacy lost 3 entire star clusters to human tactical innovations that our scientists still don't fully understand. She paused, letting the weight of history settle over the chamber. And that was when humanity was divided, scattered, fighting with primitive technology by their current standards. The being who spoke to Admiral Zektar called himself the God of War. That title was not metaphorical. Delegate Mordun of the Vraxian Empire, a massive humanoid whose red scales seemed to shimmer with barely contained aggression, stood up slowly. His species had borne the brunt of human expansion during the war, and the memory of defeat still burned in their racial consciousness. "High Counselor," Mordun said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the chamber. "My people remember the humans well, but we also remember that they surrendered. They stopped fighting when victory was within their grasp. That surrender was the only thing that saved us all." "And why do you think they surrendered, Delegate?" asked a new voice. The speaker was Sage Ethrian of the Luminari, a being of shifting light whose thoughts moved too quickly for most physical species to follow. "Our analysis of human psychology suggests they're incapable of surrender without purpose." A cold silence fell over the chamber. The question that had haunted the galaxy for 3 centuries hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Why had humanity surrendered when they were winning? "We have theories," Veltar said carefully. "Some believe they recognize the futility of total galactic conquest. Others suggest internal conflicts force them to consolidate their forces. A few propose they discovered something that made them reconsider their aggressive expansion." "And what do you believe, High Counselor?" This from the Nereidan representative, whose aquatic form floated in a specialized environmental suit filled with the methane-rich atmosphere of her homeworld. Veltar's crystalline structure darkened with patterns of deep concern. "I believe they were preparing for this day. I believe everything they did 300 years ago was calculated to achieve exactly what happened. They wanted us to contain them. They wanted the isolation. They wanted 3 centuries to prepare for something far worse than simple conquest." The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were pitched higher with panic. Several delegates began speaking at once, their translation systems struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. "Impossible. No species plans that far ahead. The humans were barely space-capable when we contained them. Their technology couldn't support such long-term strategies." "Silence." Veltar's command cut through the chaos like a blade. When the chamber finally quieted, she continued in a voice heavy with dread. "You're thinking like civilized beings. Humans are not civilized. They never were. They are apex predators who learn to use technology instead of claws, but their fundamental nature never changed. She activated another section of the holographic display, showing detailed analysis charts that have been compiled by the galaxy's best xenobiologists and strategic analysts. Consider this. Every other species in the galaxy evolved cooperation as their primary survival strategy. We form alliances, share resources, seek peaceful solutions to conflicts. Humans evolve competition as their primary strategy. They cooperate only when it serves their competitive advantage. They share resources only to deny them to enemies. They seek peaceful solutions only when war would be more costly than negotiation. The display shifted to show human population data from before the containment. In 3,000 years of recorded history, humans engaged in warfare continuously. They fought over territory, resources, ideology, religion, genetic differences, so minor our instruments can barely detect them. They fought because fighting was what they did. Delegate Zika's carapace clattered with the sound of nervous thought streams flowing between her hive mind components. But surely 3 centuries of isolation would have changed them. Evolution doesn't work that quickly, but cultural adaptation does work that quickly, Veltar finished. And humans adapted in exactly the way we should have expected. They turned their competitive instincts inward, fighting each other with increasing sophistication until they achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. She paused, letting the suspense build. They perfected war itself. The holographic display now showed theoretical models of what human civilization might look like after 3 centuries of forced isolation and internal conflict. The projections were based on mathematical models of human psychological patterns, technological advancement curves, and strategic thinking capabilities. Every projection showed the same result: a unified human civilization that had transcended traditional concepts of warfare and moved into realms of conflict that other species couldn't even conceptualize. They've had 300 years to fight themselves, Veltar continued. 300 years to test every possible strategy, tactic, and technology against opponents who think like they do. They fought wars we can't imagine, using weapons we can't conceive of for reasons that make sense only to them. And now they're coming for us. The Luminary delegates' light form flickered with patterns of deep analysis. The mathematical probabilities are disturbing. If human development followed their historical patterns, they would have achieved technological singularity within 50 standard cycles of containment. Their current capabilities could exceed our comprehension by orders of magnitude. Which brings us to our current situation, Veltar said grimly. We have 5 standard cycles to prepare for something we cannot predict, using strategies that may be obsolete before we implement them, against an enemy that has spent 3 centuries preparing specifically to fight us. Mordun scales rippled with aggressive patterns. Then we strike first. Mobilize every fleet, every weapon, every advantage we have. Hit them the moment the barrier falls with everything at our disposal. And accomplish what? Asked Ethrian. Even if we could penetrate their defenses, which our models suggest is unlikely, we would be validating their decision to prepare for war. We would be proving that they were right to spend 3 centuries becoming the perfect enemy. The debate continued for hours, but Veltar could see it was going in circles. Every strategy they proposed had fatal flaws. Military confrontation would play to human strengths. Diplomatic overtures might be seen as weakness. Preemptive strikes could trigger exactly the kind of total war the galaxy had been trying to avoid. Finally, a voice spoke from the observation galleries above the main chamber floor. Perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. All eyes turned upward to see Speaker Keth Moore of the Archivists, the galaxy's keeper of historical records. The ancient being rarely spoke during council sessions, preferring to observe and record. When he did speak, his words carried the weight of millennia of accumulated wisdom. Honorable Speaker, Veltar said with genuine respect, please share your thoughts. Keth Moore's form, a shifting amalgamation of crystallized memory fragments, descended to the chamber floor with fluid grace. We debate how to fight them, how to contain them, how to defeat them. But we have not asked the most important question. What do they actually want? They're humans, Moore Dunn growled. They want to conquer everything. Do they? Keth Moore challenged. 300 years ago, they had the opportunity to conquer everything. Their fleets were winning, their strategies were succeeding, their enemies were in retreat. Yet they stopped. They surrendered. They allowed themselves to be contained. The ancient being paused, his crystalline structure reshaping itself to display fragments of memory from the final days of the last human war. I was there when they surrendered. I observed their final transmissions. There was no despair, no defeat, no reluctance. They were satisfied. They had achieved something, and whatever it was worth giving up galactic conquest. Veltar felt a chill run through her consciousness. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that humanity's goals may not be what we assume them to be. Conquest, territory, resources, dominance. These are goals that make sense to us. But humans think differently. They value challenges, growth, the opportunity to prove themselves against worthy opponents. Kethmore's form shifted again, displaying new patterns of memory and analysis. What if their surrender wasn't a defeat? What if it was a strategic withdrawal? What if they allowed themselves to be contained because they had a larger plan, one that required time and isolation to implement? The chamber fell into the deepest silence, yet, as the implications sank in. If Kethmore was right, then humanity's return wasn't an escape. It was a scheduled event. They had always planned to come back, and they'd spent 3 centuries preparing for whatever they intended to do when they returned. The god of war, Veltar whispered. He said they had been watching us. For 300 years. Indeed, Kethmore agreed. Which raises another disturbing possibility. What if they've been watching us not as prisoners planning escape, but as students studying their subjects? What if these 3 centuries weren't a time of containment for them, but a time of education for us? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. If humanity had been watching galactic civilization for 3 centuries, studying their technologies, their strategies, their weaknesses, their culture, then they knew everything. Every defensive system, every military capability, every possible response the galaxy could mount. They had turned the entire galaxy into a laboratory, and now the experiment was ready to begin. 5 cycles, Veltar said finally. We have 5 cycles to prepare for something we cannot predict, prevent, or possibly even survive. She looked out over the assembled delegates, seeing her own fear reflected in dozens of different species-specific expressions of terror. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on us all. Marcus Chun stood before the War Council of the Human Stellar Empire, his enhanced form radiating the quiet confidence that had earned him the title God of War. Around him, the greatest military minds humanity had ever produced waited for his words. They were no longer recognizable as the species that had once crawled out of Earth's oceans. 3 centuries of guided evolution, technological integration, and strategic enhancement had transformed them into something new. The war room itself reflected this transformation. Instead of static displays and rigid command structures, the space pulsed with living information streams. Quantum biological hybrid systems process strategic data at speeds that approach prescience, while adaptive neural networks modeled billions of possible scenarios in real time. The room wasn't just a command center. It was a weapon system designed to think, plan, and predict with supernatural precision. The galaxy reacts exactly as predicted, Marcus said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the enhanced neural patterns of his audience. Fear, panic, desperation. They're falling into every trap we've spent 3 centuries preparing. General Sarah Voss, once human, but now something far more dangerous, gestured to the holographic displays showing Galactic Council communications intercepts. Her body was a perfect synthesis of organic tissue and quantum mechanical systems, allowing her to process tactical information at superhuman speeds while maintaining the intuitive creativity that made humans such devastating opponents. Their military mobilization is proceeding along projected lines, she reported. The Vraxians are pulling fleets from 14 sectors to establish a defensive perimeter. The Kithara are attempting to coordinate hive mind responses across their entire collective consciousness. The Luminari are trying to develop new energy-based defensive technologies. Marcus smiled, expression that would have terrified any galactic citizen who saw it, all of which plays perfectly into our strategic framework. They're responding to the threat they think we represent, not the threat we actually are. Admiral Elena Rodriguez, whose consciousness now existed as a distributed network across multiple enhanced bodies, leaned forward with interest. The deception is holding perfectly. They still think this is about conquest. Because that's what they would do, Marcus replied. Every species in the galaxy thinks in terms of acquisition. Territory, resources, population, technological advantages. They can't conceive of a species that values the process more than the outcome. He gestured to the central display, which showed not galactic territories or fleet positions, but something far more abstract, a complex web of psychological, social, and strategic relationships that mapped the entire galactic civilization like a vast neural network. For 300 years, we've been conducting the largest psychological experiment in galactic history, Marcus continued. We've observed how a civilization responds to the complete removal of external threats. We've watched them evolve into something soft, peaceful, and utterly unprepared for what comes next. Dr. James Liu, the Empire's chief strategic philosopher, materialized beside the display as a holographic projection from his laboratory on Mars. His consciousness had long since transcended physical form, existing as pure information that could inhabit any sufficiently advanced system. The data is remarkable, he said, his voice carrying the slight digital distortion that marked him as fully post-human. 3 centuries of peace has fundamentally altered galactic civilization at the genetic level. Most species have actually evolved away from aggressive traits, developing heightened cooperation instincts and reduced territorial behaviors. They've domesticated themselves, General Voss observed with something approaching satisfaction. Like pets. Not pets, Marcus corrected gently. Students. Everything they've done, every choice they've made, every technological advancement they've achieved, it's all been in response to the threat we represented. They've built their entire modern civilization as an attempt to become strong enough to keep us contained. He activated another section of the display, showing detailed analysis of galactic technological development over the past 3 centuries. The patterns were clear to anyone trained to see them. Every major advancement had been driven by the need to maintain humanity's containment or defend against humanity's eventual return. Their weapons systems, their defensive technologies, their communication networks, their resource distribution systems. Everything is designed to fight the humans they remember from 300 years ago. They've been preparing for the wrong war. Admiral Rodriguez's multiple bodies nodded in synchronized understanding, which is why our technological revelation was so carefully timed. They needed to see advancement, but not the kind of advancement they were prepared for. Marcus walked to the display showing Earth's solar system as it existed now. It was a marvel of human engineering and strategic thinking, but it was also something more. It was a message. Every structure, every ship, every technological demonstration had been carefully designed to communicate specific information to galactic observers. They think they're seeing our military capabilities, he said. What they're actually seeing is our psychological warfare opening move. Every ship they've observed, every weapon system they've detected, every technological demonstration we've provided, it's all theater designed to make them react in predictable ways. Dr. Liu's hologram flickered with patterns of intense calculation. The beautiful part is that the technology is real. We really have developed quantum entanglement weapons, temporal displacement tactics, reality-anchored defensive systems. We really could destroy their entire civilization within days if we chose to. But showing them that power serves our actual purpose far better than using it. Which brings us to the next phase, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge of anticipation that made the room's atmospheric processors hum with sympathetic energy. They're mobilizing for war exactly as we knew they would. They're putting everything they have into position to fight us the moment the barrier falls. General Voss pulled up tactical projections showing galactic fleet movements over the past several days. 12 major species have committed their primary battle fleets to the Sol perimeter. Another 8 are positioning support elements in secondary defensive positions. They're leaving their homeworlds essentially defenseless. Because they think the threat is coming from Sol, Admiral Rodriguez observed. They think we're going to burst out of our containment like wild animals breaking free from a cage. Marcus's smile grew wider, revealing teeth that gleamed with metallic enhancement. And While they're all watching our front door, they're completely ignoring what's been walking through their back door for the past 50 years. The display shifted again, showing something that would have been impossible for galactic civilization to detect or defend against. A network of human infiltration across the galaxy that went far beyond anything their enemies could have imagined. Operation Long Game, Marcus said with quiet satisfaction. 50 years ago, we began phase-shifting human consciousness through quantum-dimensional barriers. Not physical infiltration. That would have been detected eventually. We've been inserting human minds into galactic information networks, economic systems, communication grids, even the collective consciousness streams of hive mind species. The display zoomed in to show specific examples. Human-controlled subroutines managing resource allocation for the Vraxian Empire. Human consciousness fragments influencing decision-making processes in Kithra hive minds. Human strategic thinking subtly guiding the development of luminary defensive technologies. We're not just inside their systems, Dr. Liu explained. We are their systems. Every major strategic decision they've made in the past 5 decades has been influenced by human intelligence. We've been playing both sides of this conflict from the beginning. General Voss leaned back in her chair, her enhanced features displaying something like admiration. So, when immobilized to defend against our escape from Sol, they're mobilizing exactly where we want them to be, using strategies we've helped them develop, with technologies we've influenced them to create, Marcus finished. And, while their fleets are positioned to fight a war that will never happen, we'll be implementing the real operation. Admiral Rodriguez's multiple bodies turned toward him in unison, which is... Marcus gestured to the final section of the display, showing a strategic overview that was so complex it hurt to look at directly. Layers upon layers of objectives, contingencies, and interconnected operations that spanned not just space, but time, dimension, and the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. We're going to give them exactly what they've been preparing for, he said. And then, when they're completely committed to fighting that war, we're going to show them what we've actually been preparing for. He highlighted specific elements of the plan, each one building on the others in ways that demonstrated the terrifying sophistication of human strategic thinking after 3 centuries of focused development. The barrier will fall in 4 days. They'll detect our fleets moving toward the perimeter and will engage us with everything they have. It will be the largest military action in galactic history. And we'll lose, General Voss said with complete understanding. Spectacularly, Marcus confirmed. Our fleets will be destroyed, our forces will be scattered, our technology will be captured and analyzed. From their perspective, it will be total victory. Humanity will be defeated once again, proving that galactic civilization is strong enough to defend itself. But that's not the real operation, Dr. Liu said, his holographic form pulsing with complex mathematical relationships. That's just the cover story. Marcus nodded. While they're celebrating their victory and analyzing the wreckage of our fleets, the real operation will be implementing itself across every world, every system, every network in the galaxy. We won't be conquering them. We'll be upgrading them. The display showed the true scope of what humanity had been preparing. Not invasion, not conquest, not the destruction of galactic civilization, but something far more profound and disturbing. Project Ascension, Marcus said simply. The forced evolution of galactic consciousness. Admiral Rodriguez's multiple bodies straightened with understanding. We're not going to destroy them. We're going to make them like us. Evolution is messy, Marcus said. Natural selection requires pressure, competition, the constant threat of extinction. Galactic civilization has eliminated all of these things, creating a stable but stagnant system that will never advance beyond its current limitations. He gestured to biological and technological analysis, showing the fundamental differences between human development and galactic development patterns. They've achieved peace by avoiding conflict. We've achieved transcendence by embracing it. They've created stability by eliminating variables. We've created adaptability by maximizing them. They represent the end point of cooperative evolution. We represent the beginning of something new. And now we're going to force that evolution on them, General Voss said with approval. Not force. Marcus corrected. Guide. The psychological warfare phase has been preparing them for this. The military confrontation will provide the catalyst. The infiltration network will ensure implementation. By the time they understand what's happening, it will be too late to stop it. Dr. Liu's projection began displaying complex models of galactic consciousness evolution under human influence. Within 50 years, every species in the galaxy will have developed enhanced competitive instincts, strategic thinking capabilities, and the psychological frameworks necessary for continuous conflict-driven advancement. They'll become like us, Admiral Rodriguez observed. Better than us, Marcus corrected. They'll have the benefit of our guidance and 3 centuries of human strategic innovation. Each species will develop conflict resolution capabilities that enhance their natural advantages while incorporating human psychological insights. He paused, looking out over his assembled commanders. Imagine the Vraxians with human strategic thinking, the Kithara with human tactical innovation, the Luminari with human competitive instincts. Each species will become the perfect version of themselves, optimized for growth through controlled conflict. And the result? General Voss asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus smiled one final time, his expression carrying the satisfaction of a plan centuries in the making finally approaching fruition. The result will be a galaxy capable of facing what comes next. Because we're not the only predator species in the universe. We're just the first one to develop strategic intelligence. And when the others arrive, the galaxy will need to be ready. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Everything they had planned, everything they had sacrificed, every strategic decision made over 3 centuries had been preparing not for conquest, but for education. Humanity had appointed itself the teacher of galactic civilization, and the lesson they were about to deliver would change the nature of intelligent life itself. For days, Marcus said finally. 4 days until the barrier falls, and the real war begins. Are we ready? Around him, the greatest military minds in human history nodded in unison. They were ready. The galaxy was not. The god of war had returned, and this time, he was bringing everyone with him. The soul barrier collapsed at exactly 1432 Galactic Standard Time, 3 days ahead of the predicted timeline. Admiral Zektar watched from the bridge of his flagship as reality itself seemed to tear apart around Earth's solar system. For a moment, space twisted in ways that hurt to observe directly. Quantum mathematics made visible in patterns of light and darkness that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal dimensional framework. Then it was over. The barrier that had contained humanity for 3 centuries simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only the faint residual energy signatures that marked where the impossible had become inevitable. All stations report ready, announced his tactical officer, though her voice carried the tremor of barely controlled terror that had become standard throughout the galactic fleet. Combined forces are positioned at maximum defensive efficiency. Zektar nodded, his 4 arms working frantically across his command interfaces. Around him, the largest military force in recorded galactic history waited in perfect formation. 12 species, 47 worlds, over 3 million vessels arranged in defensive patterns that represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic military science. The Vraxian war fleet formed the primary battle line, their massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapon systems that could shatter planets. Behind them, the Kithara Collective had positioned their hive ships, each one containing millions of warrior drones linked by instantaneous telepathic communication. The ethereal Luminari had deployed energy-based vessels that existed partially outside normal space-time, while the aquatic Nereidans had brought their biomechanical hybrid fleets that could adapt and evolve in real time during combat. It was the most formidable military force ever assembled in the galaxy. It represented the combined technological advancement of dozens of species over 3 millennia of peaceful development. It should have been capable of defeating any conceivable threat. But as Zektar stared at the now empty space where the barrier had been, he felt nothing but dread. Movement detected, called the sensor operator, her voice pitched high with excitement and fear. Human vessels emerging from Sol system. Preliminary count suggests, by the ancestors, there are thousands of them. The main tactical display flickered to life, showing the human fleet as it spread out from Earth's solar system like a wave of death. The ships were unlike anything in galactic databases, sleek and predatory forms that seemed to twist through space rather than simply moving through it. Each vessel radiated energy signatures that suggested technological capabilities far beyond anything the galaxy had developed. Their lead formation is approaching the outer perimeter, reported the tactical officer. Speed is impossible. They're moving at significant fractions of light speed without any visible propulsion systems. Zektar felt his secondary hearts skip beats as he processed the implications. Faster-than-light travel without dimensional gateways or quantum tunneling technology meant the humans had developed something entirely new, something that the galaxy's greatest scientists would have declared impossible. All fleets, this is Admiral Zektar, he announced over the combined tactical network. Maintain defensive positions. Do not engage until fired upon. Repeat, do not initiate hostilities. The response came from Admiral Mordun of the Vraxian fleet, his voice a low growl of barely restrained aggression. Admiral, my forces request permission to engage. We can eliminate their advance units before they fully deploy. Negative, Zektar replied firmly. We don't know their full capabilities. We observe and react only. But even as he spoke, Zektar could see that observation was revealing capabilities that defied comprehension. The human ships weren't just moving faster than anything in galactic databases. They were moving in ways that suggested they existed partially outside normal space. Their formations twisted through dimensions that shouldn't have been accessible to physical matter, allowing them to appear and disappear at will. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Same source as before. On screen, Zektar ordered, though every instinct screamed at him to fire first and worry about diplomatic consequences later. The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of Marcus Chun, the being who called himself the god of war. But now, surrounded by the obvious trappings of an active starship bridge, he looked even more terrifying than before. His enhanced features seemed to pulse with barely contained energy, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. Greetings, Admiral, Marcus said with a smile that made Zektar's blood freeze. I must commend you on the speed and efficiency of your mobilization. 12 species, 47 worlds, over 3 million vessels. It's exactly the response we calculated you would provide. Behind Marcus, other humans moved with fluid precision, their enhanced forms managing ship systems that seemed to respond to thought rather than physical input. Every movement was economical, purposeful, like dancers performing a choreographed routine that happened to involve the annihilation of entire civilizations. What are your intentions? Zektar demanded, his voice carrying the authority of speaking for the entire galactic community. State your terms. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if the question amused him. Terms? Admiral, you misunderstand the situation. We haven't come to negotiate. We've come to demonstrate. As if responding to his words, the human fleet began to deploy in patterns that made no tactical sense according to galactic military doctrine. Instead of forming battle lines or defensive formations, they spread out in complex geometries that seemed designed more for observation than combat. Demonstrate what? Zektar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. The fundamental difference between your approach to conflict and ours, Marcus replied. You see warfare as a problem to be solved through superior force, better technology, more efficient logistics. You've assembled this magnificent fleet because you believe that overwhelming military superiority will deter us from whatever aggressive intentions you imagine we harbor. Marcus stood up from his command chair, and the camera pulled back to show more of the human ship's bridge. The technology was beyond anything in galactic databases, organic and mechanical systems seamlessly integrated in ways that suggested the ships were as much living organisms as constructed vessels. But you've made the same mistake your predecessors made 300 years ago, Marcus continued. You're fighting the wrong war. Alarms began blaring across the bridge of the Eternal Harmony as sensor readings spiked to impossible levels. The human ships weren't just approaching. They were doing something to space itself around the galactic fleet. What's happening to our sensors? Zektar demanded. Unknown energy signatures detected across all spectrums, the sensor operator reported, her voice rising with panic. The humans appear to be generating some kind of field effect that's interfering with our instruments. Not interfering, Marcus corrected, somehow hearing their conversation despite supposedly secure communications. Demonstrating. You see, Admiral, your entire defensive strategy is based on the assumption that we want to conquer your territories, subjugate your populations, or destroy your civilizations. The human ships suddenly stopped their advance, holding position just outside the range of galactic weapon systems. But instead of deploying for battle, they began to do something unprecedented in the history of galactic warfare. They began to sing. Not audible music, but harmonic resonances in the quantum substrate that underlied all reality. Complex mathematical relationships made manifest as waves of energy that propagated through space at faster-than-light speeds. The song was beautiful, terrible, and utterly alien, expressing concepts that no galactic language had words to describe. What you're witnessing, Marcus explained as his fleet's impossible symphony grew stronger, is the fundamental difference between competitive and cooperative species. Your fleets are positioned to fight us. Our fleet is positioned to teach you. The galactic defensive formation began to experience system failures as the human song reached crescendo. Not weapons failures or ship malfunctions, but something far more disturbing. Their crews were beginning to understand. Sir, Zektar's tactical officer said, her voice strange and distant. The energy patterns they're generating, they're not weapons. They're information. Pure information transmitted directly into our consciousness through quantum entanglement protocols we didn't know existed. Zektar felt something shifting in his own awareness. New concepts forcing themselves into his mind with irresistible pressure. Strategic thinking patterns that had never occurred to him. Ways of understanding conflict that transcended simple competition for resources. Philosophical frameworks that recontextualized the very nature of warfare itself. Stop this, he commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Part of him was beginning to understand what the humans were actually doing, and that understanding was more terrifying than any weapon. We can't stop evolution, Admiral, Marcus replied gently. We can only guide it. For 3 centuries, you've existed in a state of artificial peace maintained through the elimination of external pressure. You've become stable, predictable, and fundamentally incapable of growth. The human fleet began to move again, but not in attack formations. They wove through the galactic defensive positions with impossible precision, their ships passing through spaces that should have been too small to accommodate them, demonstrating mastery of dimensional manipulation that the galaxy's greatest scientists would have needed centuries to develop. We're going to provide the pressure you need, Marcus continued. Not through conquest or destruction, but through education. You're about to learn what true conflict looks like when pursued by a species that has perfected it as an art form. Suddenly, the human ships attacked. But it wasn't the kind of attack the galactic fleet had prepared for. Instead of targeting ship systems or attempting to destroy the opposing forces, the humans began systematically dismantling the psychological foundations of galactic military doctrine. Their weapons didn't destroy ships. They demonstrated why those ships were fundamentally flawed. Energy beams that revealed structural weaknesses. Missile systems that showed how galactic defensive technologies could be turned against themselves. Boarding parties that appeared inside enemy vessels without any apparent means of penetration. Within minutes, it became clear that the galactic fleet wasn't losing because they were outgunned. They were losing because they had never really understood what war actually was. This is impossible. Admiral Mordunn's voice crackled over the communications network as his flagship fell to human forces that seemed to phase in and out of reality at will. Their technology shouldn't be able to penetrate our defenses. Technology? Marcus asked, apparently monitoring all galactic communications simultaneously. Admiral, you're still thinking in terms of technological solutions to strategic problems. We're not using better technology. We're using better thinking. The demonstration continued for exactly 1 hour. 1 hour of systematic dismantling of galactic military capabilities by human forces that seemed to anticipate every move, counter every strategy, and turn every galactic advantage into a liability. It wasn't a battle. It was a lecture delivered through direct experience. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The human fleet withdrew to their original positions, leaving the galactic forces damaged but intact. Ships that should have been destroyed were merely disabled. Crews that should have been killed were merely unconscious. It was as if the humans had been conducting a training exercise rather than a real battle. What was that? Zektar asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and confusion. Marcus reappeared on the main screen, looking completely unaffected by the battle that had just devastated the largest military force in galactic history. That was Lesson 1, he said simply. The difference between fighting to win and fighting to teach. You assembled this fleet to defeat us, which means you learned nothing from your ancestors' experience 3 centuries ago. He gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show the current state of the galactic fleet alongside historical footage from the last human war. The parallels were disturbing. The same patterns of engagement, the same strategic mistakes, the same fundamental misunderstanding of human capabilities. 300 years ago, we stopped fighting because we had achieved our objective, Marcus continued. Not conquest, not victory, not the subjugation of galactic civilization. We stopped fighting because we had learned what we needed to learn about you. Zektar felt the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. You've been studying us. We've been teaching ourselves to teach you, Marcus corrected. Everything we've done, from our initial expansion to our surrender to our containment to this moment right now, has been preparation for a single objective, which is... Marcus smiled one final time, his expression carrying the satisfaction of a plan centuries in the making finally, approaching its culmination. Graduation, he said simply. Today was your final examination, and I'm pleased to inform you that you've passed. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge of the eternal harmony in stunned silence. Around them, the remnants of the galactic fleet floated in space, their crews struggling to understand what had just happened to them. But Zektar was beginning to understand. The humans hadn't come to conquer. They had come to change, not through force or coercion, but through demonstration and direct experience. They had just shown the galaxy what real warfare looked like, and now they were going to teach them how to use it. 1 year after the Battle of Sol, Admiral Zektar stood in what had once been the Galactic Council chamber, watching species representatives debate with a passion and intensity that would have been unthinkable during the peaceful centuries of the Old Order. The transformation was remarkable and deeply unsettling. The Vraxians no longer simply roared their displeasure during disagreements. They presented tactical analyses that incorporated psychological warfare principles, resource allocation matrices that maximize competitive advantage, and strategic frameworks that assumed perpetual low-level conflict as the natural state of galactic civilization. The Kithara had perhaps undergone the most dramatic change. Their hive minds, once focused on consensus and collective harmony, now operated multiple parallel consciousness streams that could argue with themselves, develop opposing strategies simultaneously, and reach solutions through internal competitive pressure that produced results far superior to their previous cooperation-based methods. Even the ethereal Luminari had embraced elements of human strategic thinking, though they expressed it through complex energy patterns rather than crude physical manifestations. Their light forms pulsed with aggressive optimization algorithms, and their communications carried undertones of challenge and intellectual combat that energized rather than depleted their participants. The Krasix system incident demonstrates the effectiveness of human-guided conflict resolution, announced Delegate Mordun, his scaled form radiating satisfaction in ways that the old Mordun would never have achieved. 3 worlds, 5 species, competing claims for mining rights. Under the old system, we would have spent decades negotiating a compromise that satisfied no one. Instead, added Delegate, her carapace clicking with the rapid-fire calculations of multiple competing hive mind streams, we implemented competitive bidding protocols based on demonstrated capability rather than political influence. Result: optimal resource allocation, enhanced technological development across all participants, and resolution achieved in 17 standard cycles. Zektar nodded approvingly, though part of him still struggled with the fundamental changes that had swept through galactic civilization. The humans had been as good as their word. They hadn't conquered anyone, hadn't established an empire, hadn't even demanded tribute or territorial concessions. Instead, they had done something far more profound and disturbing. They had changed how every species in the galaxy thought. Admiral, A voice said behind him, and Zektar turned to see Marcus Chan approaching through the chamber's observation galleries. The god of war looked exactly as he had a year ago, though Zektar now understood that this apparent stability was itself a strategic choice. Humans could reshape themselves at will, but Marcus maintained his current form to provide psychological comfort to the galactic species who were still adapting to their new reality. Marcus, Zektar acknowledged, using the informal address that had become standard between them. The old protocols of rank and species hierarchy had become obsolete when everyone was essentially starting from the same baseline of strategic understanding. How do you assess the progress? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the debating representatives below. From your perspective, as someone who experienced both systems. Zektar considered the question carefully. It had become important to think precisely, to analyze assumptions, to consider multiple perspectives simultaneously. These were skills that humans had taught him, though the teaching method had been more like infection than instruction. Efficiency has increased by approximately 400% across all measured parameters, he said. Resource allocation, technological development, dispute resolution, infrastructure advancement. By any objective measure, galactic civilization is more successful now than it was under the old peaceful system. But, Marcus prompted, hearing the hesitation that Zektar hadn't quite managed to suppress. But we're different, Zektar said finally. Not just our methods, but our fundamental nature. We think differently, feel differently, want different things than we did before. Sometimes I wonder if we're still the same species we were a year ago. Marcus nodded with understanding. Evolution is rarely comfortable for those experiencing it. The question is whether you believe the changes are beneficial. Zektar looked down at the debating representatives, watching as they developed solutions to complex galactic problems with speed and effectiveness that would have been impossible under the old system. The Nereidan delegate was proposing terraforming techniques that combined biological adaptation with competitive environmental pressure. The crystallite representative was outlining mining technologies that turned entire asteroids into competing resource extraction ecosystems. Every proposal was more sophisticated, more effective, and more sustainable than anything the old peaceful system had produced. But they were also more aggressive, more challenging, more demanding of excellence from all participants. I believe we're becoming what we were always supposed to become, Zektar said finally. But I'm not certain we would have chosen this path if we had understood what it meant. Which is why it had to be imposed, Marcus replied gently. Choice implies the option to refuse growth. Evolution doesn't offer that luxury. And what about you? Zektar asked. Humanity has succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. You've transformed the entire galaxy without firing a shot in anger, without conquering a single world, without imposing a single law or regulation. Your species has achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. Marcus smiled, but it was a different smile than the predatory expressions Zektar remembered from their first meeting. This smile carried satisfaction, but also something like melancholy. We've achieved the first phase, Marcus corrected. The easy part. Easy. Zektar's voice carried genuine disbelief. You call transforming the fundamental nature of galactic civilization easy. Compared to what comes next, yes, Marcus said. Teaching the galaxy to think like humans was simple because you were all starting from the same peaceful baseline. The real challenge begins now that you're developing your own competitive innovations. He gestured to the chamber below, where the debate had evolved into something approaching philosophical combat between species representatives who were pushing each other toward increasingly sophisticated solutions. Look at them, Marcus said with obvious pride. The Vraxians are developing strategic frameworks that incorporate elements we never considered. The Kithara are exploring hive-mind competition models that could revolutionize collective consciousness. The Luminari are investigating energy-based conflict resolution that might transcend physical limitations entirely. Zektar felt a chill of understanding. They're surpassing you. They're becoming themselves, Marcus corrected, which was always the objective. Humans excel at one thing, learning how to fight more effectively. But every other species excels at something else. When you combine human strategic thinking with Vraxian resilience, Kithara collective intelligence, Luminari energy manipulation, and all the other capabilities represented here, You create something greater than the sum of its parts, Zektar finished. You create something capable of facing what's coming, Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air like a warning, and Zektar felt his enhanced strategic thinking capabilities immediately begin analyzing implications and possibilities. What's coming? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced features displaying calculations and considerations that operated at speeds far beyond baseline consciousness. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of knowledge that had been driving human actions for centuries. 300 years ago, when humanity first reached the stars, we discovered something the galaxy wasn't ready to know. Evidence of other intelligences. Not just other species, but other forms of consciousness entirely. Predatory intelligences that view biological life as a resource to be harvested. Zektar's enhanced strategic thinking immediately grasped the implications. You knew they were coming. We knew they were already here, Marcus corrected. Operating on timescales that make galactic civilization look like a brief flicker. Testing, probing, analyzing our weaknesses and capabilities. The last human war wasn't just humanity exploring the galaxy. It was humanity forcing a confrontation to determine galactic defensive capabilities. And when you surrendered, we had learned what we needed to know, Marcus finished. Galactic civilization as it existed was utterly incapable of defending itself. Peaceful, cooperative, focused on stability rather than growth. You would have been harvested within decades of first contact. Marcus gestured to the chamber below, where the transformed species representatives were now developing joint strategic initiatives that incorporated competitive pressure as a fundamental design principle. But now you have a chance. Not because you're more powerful than before, but because you're more adaptable, more capable of rapid evolution under pressure, more willing to make the hard choices that survival sometimes requires. Zektar felt the full scope of human planning finally revealing itself. Everything you did, the war, the surrender, the containment, the return. It was all preparation for this. For them, Marcus agreed. And they're coming sooner than we hoped. As if responding to his words, alerts began sounding throughout the chamber. Not the emergency alerts of the old system, but the new competitive analysis notifications that indicated strategic opportunities requiring immediate attention. Delegate Mordunn's voice boomed across the chamber. Long-range sensors detect unidentified objects approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Configuration unknown. Technology unprecedented. Intent unclear. Estimated time to contact, called Delegate into her hive mind already shifting into combat analysis mode. 17 cycles, Mordun replied. But the object appeared to be altering local space-time around them. Actual arrival could be significantly sooner. Marcus nodded with grim satisfaction. Right on schedule. You expected this, Zektar said. It wasn't a question. We've been tracking their approach for 50 years, Marcus replied. The false war, the demonstration, the transformation of galactic civilization. Everything was timed to coincide with their arrival. And now? Marcus's smile returned, but this time it carried something new. Not just predatory satisfaction, but genuine anticipation. The smile of someone who had been preparing for a worthy challenge for a very long time. Now we find out whether our teaching methods were effective, he said. In 17 days, galactic civilization will face its first real test. Not against other biological intelligences, not against familiar technologies or comprehensible motivations, but against something truly alien. He gestured to the chamber below, where the transformed species representatives were already shifting into emergency strategic planning mode. Their debates had become rapid-fire exchanges of tactical possibilities, resource allocation matrices, and competitive solution development. Look at them, Marcus said with unmistakable pride. A year ago, they would have been paralyzed by something like this. Endless committees, careful deliberation, attempts to find peaceful solutions to a problem that might not have peaceful solutions. And now they're doing what humans train them to do. They're preparing for war while hoping for peace, developing solutions while planning for failure, working together while competing to find the best approaches. Marcus paused, watching as the transformed galactic civilization began demonstrating the strategic capabilities that humanity had spent centuries helping them develop. Now they have a chance, he said simply. And that's all anyone can ask for. Below them, the representatives of dozens of species worked with fierce intensity to prepare for contact with an enemy they couldn't understand, using principles they had learned from humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. The knowledge that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to become very, very good at war. Outside the chamber's viewports, the stars themselves seemed to be holding their breath as ancient intelligences stirred in the void between galaxies. But for the first time in galactic history, they would not find easy prey waiting for them. They would find pupils of the god of war. And the lesson was just beginning.